Freeze it. Our theme today is that of leadership, and there's an enormous amount written about leadership, and there are a huge range of courses available. But what interests me is how many people will go on a leadership course, but actually when they come back, the day-to-day running of whatever it is that they're doing gets in the way, and very quickly the vast majority of what they've learned gets forgotten. And for me, the missing link is that people are not taught to lead themselves.
No.
It's all very well leading other people, but if you don't manage yourself and you don't model the behaviours that you want from other people, if you don't have clarity about what you're trying to achieve and why, and have the capacity to communicate that, if you don't set high expectations very early on, and then manage those expectations and hold people to account, giving positive, constructive feedback, then you're not leading.
No.
And it's one of the reasons I think why we live in a world where so many people are working in really toxic environments where bullying is rife.
Yeah.
And I think the problem has lots of layers to it.
Yes.
And so today, one of the things that I'd like you to share with us is our thoughts around the development of leadership, what makes a great leader. And we'd love to hear what you think. So if you're a leader and you're struggling with a particular member of staff or a project, please contact us through the website, genuinely-u.com. It's info@genuinely-u. And let us know. If you're a worker, part of the team, and you're struggling to manage up, because I think the conventional view is you only lead and manage down. When actually there's just as much skill involved in managing up, particularly if you've got a tricky manager.
Yes.
And I think if people understood that process better, that they would find it easier. But for me, at the very heart of everything is you are the leader of your life, if you choose to be. You are the common denominator which goes into every situation from the second you're born until the second you die. We don't know beyond that, but certainly in this lifetime, you are the common denominator. So it makes sense to be the leader of your life.
Yes.
And once you lead yourself and you've got that under control with some simple principles and techniques, then the capacity to become a good leader, I think, is really possible.
Yes, because in actual fact, to define a good leader is, well, it's sort of like intangible, isn't it? There's
but you know when you've got one.
You definitely know when you've got one.
And you certainly know when you haven't.
It's much easier, I think, to define what bad leadership looks and feels like. And I think that's because it's much more prevalent and we all experience it on a much more frequent basis.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to think that I was a successful leader and a good leader of my team of nearly 100 people when I was
the results speak for themselves, Gina.
And even now I hear from people to say it was a time that I really valued and that I got a lot out of.
Yes.
Now, one might argue that meant that I was a very liberal leader and somebody who let people get away with things. But my experience is that actually people are far better, far happier, far more secure when there are clear boundaries, but boundaries that they understand why they're there and that they're fairly administered to everyone.
Yes. And that they're sensible, logical, meaningful boundaries, not just arbitrary and ego-driven.
The why, I think, is never more important than when you are trying to lead. And interestingly for me, that there's a huge discussion about leading and managing. And for me, if you're going to be a good manager, you've got to be a great leader.
Yes.
Management for me is the day-to-day stuff.
Yes.
But ultimately, even if you're talking about within the family, as a parent, I think one of the problems is that the parents don't want to lead. They want to be part of the pack. They want to be friends
with kids,
and not parents. And they've got to make a stand in terms of what they believe is important.
That's interesting to me, because generally speaking, in my corporate life, I was not a good leader, and I know the reasons for that. And they were really around my interest levels and engagement with the task at hand.
Yeah.
And I couldn't find it within myself to have the passion and the desire to really be a good leader of men. I was more of a manager and an administrator. I was very senior, but I didn't engage with what I was doing. It wasn't me. So that's a bit of a hint for what I think a good leader is, that they have to be fundamentally comfortable within their skin, and with, given the task, the job of leading that they've got. So generally speaking, in my corporate life, I think I wasn't such a good leader. I'm not a good leader, and being an author and a writer, I only have to lead myself. So this is where I excel at. I'm great at doing that. But actually, when you say about parenting, I think I probably am a bit of a leader when it comes to being a parent. I fail all the time. Don't get me wrong, but I don't have that desire to be pally with my kids, in the sense of wanting them to call me their best friend. I've always said to my children, do you know what? You're going to have loads of really good best friends in your life, but you'll only have one mother, and that's the role I am. Yes. So it's not that I'm not your friend; it's just that I am primarily your mother.
Yeah.
And in that sense, I hope to be a better leader.
At times you have to do things which are going to be unpopular, like go to bed now and turn your phone off.
Stop looking at your screen.
I teach leadership all the time, and one of the things that I find quite interesting is if you ask people to write a list of what makes a poor leader, they find it very easy. And certainly I learned a lot about leading other people in my first 2 teaching jobs.
Yes.
The first head would not be seen until he'd done the Telegraph crossword. He had a notice on his door saying "Do not disturb." He was rubbish at crosswords, so you rarely saw him before 2 o'clock.
Oh, Lordy.
And he was somebody who would give you a free rein, which in some ways worked well because he had a great staff.
Yes.
But then he would suddenly think, oh, I need to go and do something. And he'd go in and he would interfere and make comments without recognising what's going on.
Yes.
And so, for example, this is a silly example, but it just gives you an indication of where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
We were doing a play, and part of the play was talking about the plague. And the children were plague victims and were miserable and downtrodden. And he suddenly arrived and said to them all, "Smile!" Because he hadn't got a clue what was going on.
You've got the bubonic plague.
And I think lots of leaders give their staff a great deal of freedom, but then come flying in, haven't taken the time to understand what's been happening and where they're up to, and start to make demands and to make changes without actually understanding. But in a sense, and my second head was just lazy. He would go off wandering. I can remember one afternoon where there was a lot of staff sickness and I had 90 kids all afternoon. And he came in at the end of the afternoon, not to tell me thank you very much, but waving a piece of paper and said, "I've just had the most wonderful wine tasting this afternoon. And I found a really good case of wine." He didn't even offer me a bottle.
Not even a sip.
Not even a sip. So I learned a lot about how not to do things, and was determined that I was going to be somebody who would do things very differently.
Yes.
But I think perhaps I'm taking this down a route and I'd like to draw it back. And I suppose the best way to think about it is, if you think about what makes a great leader, and then look at that, how does that work in terms of you as the person? I think for me it all starts with self-belief.
Yes.
And the difference between self-belief, where you have the confidence to know what you are about, your strengths, but also your weaknesses and your vulnerabilities.
Yes.
To be able to play to your strengths and wish to develop the areas of weakness or vulnerability.
Yes.
And be honest. And for me, being a great leader is all about being authentic, being genuine,
Yes.
And if you don't know what you're doing, be honest about it and get somebody in who does.
I think that the aspect of humility in
Huge,
leadership
yes.
it's often overlooked and can sometimes be dismissed, I think, in certain corporate organisational cultures as being weakness. But I think a leader who has a level of humility about them demonstrates their humanity, demonstrates their authenticity, and nothing ever went wrong from somebody saying, actually, I don't know.
Yeah.
So I need help.
I think that's less dangerous than people who purport to know and then won't take help because it would make them look bad.
Yes.
I used to call it, the best boy or girl in the class syndrome. And there were lots of heads, and there were lots of business managers who won't appoint people who are cleverer than them.
Ridiculous. I mean, so sort of short-minded and short everything, isn't it, really? Just because there's always going to be somebody.
My job as a leader was to employ the very, very best people at everything. My job, I believed, was to lead them, to set the vision, to be very clear about what we were trying to achieve.
Yes.
But then to employ the best mathematician, the best IT person, the best language person.
Yes.
So that collectively we were able to move things on. And it was made very clear to people who were being appointed, your job is to be within the team, not only leading your subject, but actually how are you going to make us all better? How are you going to develop people? But a lot of people are frightened
fear
of having somebody who appears to know more than them. And one of my pet hates was where people took the credit for their team.
Yes.
Or for somebody within their team, nicked the idea and then took credit for it. And that, for me,
shoddy, isn't it?
Huge lack of integrity.
Yes.
And actually, you have credit in the fact that they are part of your team, and that you've nurtured them, and given them the space and the resources to do whatever. But I think it shows a mean spirit when people want to take the credit.
Have you heard of the phrase servant leader?
I was just going to bring that up. Stephen Covey, who I think has so much to offer. And if listeners haven't read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and then his later book, about 15 or 16 years later, the 8th Habit, which is all around being a servant leader. And I'd like to think that's what I was.
Yes.
The principle being that in the 7 Habits, it talks about the different styles of leadership, authoritative, delegative, collaborative, laissez-faire, and so on. Yeah. And there is a role for all of those, according to need and people's experience.
Yes, I mean,
and
it
purpose.
literally can change from moment to moment, depending on the type of job you've got.
If there's a fire, you want somebody who's in authoritative mood.
You don't really want
the building,
do you?
No. If you fancy leaving the building, well, get on with it. Collegiate or democratic takes a lot of time, and is great for getting buy-in. But if you try and do everything by committee, you end up with, they say a camel is an animal made by committee. It gives you the hump.
A horse designed by a committee.
But the servant leader is you do whatever is required to resource the people that you have so that they can do a brilliant job.
Yes.
And you hold the piece together.
Yes.
And for me, that's the perfect leader.
The best leaders that I have had the pleasure of working within teams have been the ones who have taken the view that their main objective is to keep the flying poo that happens in organisations, keep it away from the team. Yeah. So they bat it away and handle it and protect their team.
Absolutely.
And protect their team, not in a egotistical sort of, they've done something wrong, let's cover it up, but protect them in the sense of saying, we have a job to do, I have the experts that can do it, I just need to keep them away from the stuff that's distracting or irrelevant or,
And when there is stuff that needs to be implemented, that it's done in a way that doesn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, that actually says, what is it that we have already that we can utilise and what do we need to change?
Yes.
And I think the big thing for leaders today is there's never been a time of greater and more speedy change. If you just think about the world of technology, it's almost impossible to keep up with it.
Yes.
And the legislation that comes through, huge.
Yeah.
And so part of the job of the leader, I think, is to actually filter out what's relevant and then to present that in a way that means that the individuals, the team and the organisation can cope with the change in a constructive way, rather than everybody is just so battered by change after change after change.
Yes.
And it's the thing that most people, more people find change a challenge than actually embrace it.
Yes.
And yet change is one of the fundamentals of life, isn't it?
Yes. And let's face it, it's very admirable when you find a person who's leading you, who demonstrates a fearlessness, a courage. It's very admirable. And if they are also demonstrating a level of protection of you to allow you to get on and do the job, then they're fostering this very human condition called trust, which, let's face it, is sort of one of the fundamental relationship builders, isn't it? If you don't trust the person, then you won't work well for them and you won't give of your best.
I mean, it's broken in so many of the big relationships. You look at, politics, you look at health, look at, pretty well any big organisation, and there will be pockets which are working well. But as an overall, I think that they are in deep trouble because trust within the organisation and externally to the organisation has been damaged. But with trust comes responsibility. And I think in other places there's no trust because the leaders haven't held people responsible and things have gone badly wrong.
Yes.
Then the trust goes, rather than, for me, the principle is if there's something going wrong and you're the leader, look to yourself first.
Yes.
Don't blame the little guy.
No.
What is it that you haven't either set out clearly? Were your expectations really clear?
Yeah.
Were they communicated and shared? Because often people think, because I've said it, that it's landed on the other person in exactly the same shape. When the reality is, you might say things, but people have different interpretation of the same words.
Yes.
Look at the word excellence. It's bandied about all over the place. But unless you unpick what does excellence look like in the context of this project or this team or this organisation, then you've got everybody singing from a different hymn sheet.
Yes.
And I believe that is the fundamental reason why my organisation is so successful.
Yes.
Because we've unpicked the behaviours in terms of relationships, in terms of planning, in terms of monitoring.
Yeah.
Excellence looks like this.
Yes.
Good looks like this.
Yes.
Okay looks like this.
Yes.
Unacceptable looks like this. And the level of professional discussion was challenging, but done in a way that everybody recognised that this was done with respect, and you could disagree, but it didn't mean I didn't like you. It didn't mean that we were falling out. We were having a professional discussion about the best way forward.
Yes.
And that enables organisations to fly.
Yes, because that level of friction, in the sense that it's not out of control and just outright anarchy going on within and arguing and for the sake of it, but a healthy level of friction where you have opposing views.
Got to.
Because in having a discussion, in having a conversation about difficult matters, is when truths and realities and misunderstandings can begin to they become apparent, and you get the transparency.
Yes.
And that's what you're really after, is somebody's definition of excellence, for instance. If it's not transparent what they absolutely mean by that, then Fred's definition of excellence, as you've already said, could be miles off it.
And people will say in reviews, it's not good enough, it needs to be better. What does better look like? What specifically is required in order for me to move forward?
Yes.
Now, it's an interesting paradox, isn't it? Because we're talking about giving people space to to be the best they can be. But I think that comes within a structure where people understand what's expected of them.
Yes.
So for me, when I appointed staff, it started at the advert, very clear what sort of person was required. Then in the interview, don't come here if you don't want to be a great team member. Don't come here if you don't want to work hard, or you're moody, or you're difficult to work with, because we won't have it. So the first time they were moody, or they didn't meet a deadline, you could say, remember the interview.
So consistency is key, isn't it? Yeah.
And I think the other thing is that if something falls short, that you confront the issue. You're not confrontational.
No.
What's going on here? The expectation is this. You're not meeting it. What is it going on? And how do we make it better? How do you take responsibility?
Yeah.
And for me, a great leader enables people within their team or their organisation to recognise they may be the toilet cleaner, they may be the senior manager for finances, but each is the leader within their own part of the organisation, and the organisation needs them all.
Absolutely.
So be the best toilet cleaner or the best financial director that you're capable of, and take pride in it.
So what do you think of the, if you like, the stereotype leader, the army general who turns around and says, you can't handle the truth, and the God complex doctor who lords it over all of his patients and his nurses and his junior doctors?
Huge ego going on there, isn't there? And
they would argue very strongly that their style of leadership was necessary, wouldn't they?
And that's their point of view. But you also meet doctors and army generals who will teach their people to think, and who will work with a patient to say, this isn't palatable news, but actually you're not on your own, and we're going to work through this together. Now, I've got expertise, but it's your body. I can remember, those of listeners may not know, I've had 2 failed back surgeries. The difference between the doctor and the first patient, who had the bedside manner of a wardrobe, who told me that his operation was a complete success, it was I who was the failure. And those were his very words, they imprinted on my mind. And the second doctor who said, it's happened again, not sure why, there's obviously something that's gone wrong, your system doesn't operate in perhaps the stereotypical way. Let's now work together to find the best way forward.
Yes.
The difference in terms of their style of leadership with their teams was reflected in the way they dealt with their patients.
Yes.
And I would say it doesn't matter which industry you're in. There will be times when I had a friend who was in the chemical industry, for example.
Right.
Very, very high control. As you'd expect, they were dealing with very dangerous stuff.
Yes.
So we had a discussion about leadership and about how much freedom he should give his team.
Yes.
And I said to him, the structure that you lay down in terms of this is non-negotiable.
Yes.
Because this is what's keeping you and the public safe.
Yes.
When you are absolutely certain that you have the trust both ways of your people, that they understand the consequences of any decision that they make, and that if it sits outside that parameter, they will be responsible for that, then where is there the negotiable stuff and the stuff where there is the space for people to be creative in terms of how they approach things?
Yes.
But in that situation, and in every situation, there will be certain things that are non-negotiable.
Yes.
But it's important as a leader that you understand, why are you making those things non-negotiable?
Yeah.
And it might be, this is not negotiable now because you're not experienced enough.
Yeah.
When you are experienced enough, that will open. Or it could be, this is life or death. Don't open that valve unless you put your safety gear on.
Yes.
It's horses for courses. It will be different according to different situations. Now, most people work in industries where it's not life-threatening.
No.
But there are still regulations. You know, regulations about data, regulations about how things operate.
Yeah.
And so making it clear what is negotiable, what is around safety, and what's not, I think is vital.
Yes. Because there's that, I mean, sometimes it's been described to me as a bit of a, oh, that's a cop-out, but there is a belief, as I hold it, is that I don't actually think anybody is turning up to work and deliberately trying to do a bad job. I think everybody is trying to do their best.
I think there are people who are not motivated.
Yes.
And then one has to question, are they not motivated because the leadership is poor?
Yeah.
And there are times when that is true.
Yes.
Are they not motivated because they're in the wrong job?
Yes.
And I think, you know, you hear a lot about of leaders talking about youngsters who come in and are finding it hard to get into the work ethic.
Yes.
And who expect to be spoon-fed.
Yes.
And I think, again, they're very different scenarios which require a very different way of looking at it. And, you know, if somebody is lazy, for example, it's having the question, you know, what's going on? This is the job, and the expectations were made clear before you started. I would suspect that very often they're not.
Yeah.
And so what was set up in the beginning is not what people are facing.
Yeah.
And again, that comes, I'm really sorry to land the responsibility onto the leader's shoulders. That's either you've not appointed the right person. There is a difference when you inherit, and we'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
Either you've not appointed the right people, they've not been trained and inducted correctly.
Yes.
And that training, lots of induction is, you know, here's the pack, or you get a morning.
Yeah.
For me, induction is the first few months until people become very much part of the organisation, and it's a two-way process.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, in answer to your question, I think generally speaking, people are doing the best they can.
Yeah.
I often think people don't recognise that they have the potential to do better. And a leader's job is to open their eyes to their potential.
Yes. Yeah.
And at times for a leader to say, this isn't right for you.
Yeah.
If you're a leader going into an established team, and I went into a team where I was the youngest bar two on the staff, appointed when the deputy had been told not to apply because they were going to appoint a man.
Yeah.
So you can appreciate I was flavour of the month.
Yeah.
You've got to get them on side. And I think part of that is you have a honeymoon period where you need to be establishing your integrity, establishing your vision, and why. The why is so important.
Yes.
That vision is so important.
Yes.
And there will come a time with people where you have to say, look, you've got a choice to make. Either you're with me or you're not. It's not what you do in the first day or even the first 3 months. But when you've tried to bring them round to your vision and they're still being very resistant, and there are people who are resistant, then it's time to say, do you know what? Think about what it is you want. Be very careful about constructive dismissal.
Yes.
Okay. Talk to your HR if you've got HR. If you haven't got HR within your business, then there are organisations that you can go to. So don't put yourself in a vulnerable position. But at the same time, if you've got a square peg in a round hole, that can hold your team and your organisation back and be very destructive.
Yes, yes.
But for me, the message I'd like everybody to take is start with you. Manage yourself. It's no good going to tell somebody off if you're angry. You know, you need to be able to do that in a neutral voice.
Yeah.
You need to be able to manage yourself. And, you know, if you're asking people to behave in a way that you don't, it's never going to work.
No.
So, you know, I think with all of the leadership things, start with who you are. Start with, you know, knowing your strengths, and then look at your team, do an audit of your team and their strengths.
Yes.
And involve them.
Yes.
Involve them in saying, you know, just doing an audit, blame me. Yes. Doing an audit of where we are. And ask your staff how they find your leadership.
Yeah.
And be open to feedback.
Oh, Lordy.
Because if you do it in the spirit of, I want it to be better,
Yeah.
I want it to be even better, perhaps.
Yeah.
Use the presupposition it's not bad to start with.
Yeah.
And I want to help you reach your potential. What is it I can do for you?
Yeah.
I think that then you can really start to fly.
Yes.
And I think perhaps our next one ought to be on how to be a great team member, because I think there is a
Yeah.
whole
Yes.
technology and principles of being a great team member.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that brings us to the end of today. Thank you very much for joining us. You'll find lots of information on my website, which is genuinely-you.com. You can also get a free digital copy of my latest best-selling book, Thriving Not Surviving, The 5 Secret Pathways to Happiness, Success and Fulfillment. You'll find Rachel's best-selling book, The Point of Me, on Amazon. That's Rachel Davidson. And if you'd like to know more about belonging to the Thrive Together tribe, which talks about becoming the leader of your life, you can try that out for $1. You'll find the link on the website. So thank you very much for joining us.